the basic point of the episode is just to talk about like diversity in visual effects and post, but that's kind of like what does that even mean exactly, right? Like what does it mean to have like more diversity or less diversity or not being diverse or any of that kind of stuff? So that's kind of the first question, is like, where does the diversity problem live in the industry, right? So for example, for this episode that we're doing right now, we're recording, the first problem we had is that like, well, if you try to collect like a panel of people and you were to just like try to randomly kind of pick people out, you would wind up with a crowd that would look like me. And then that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where the problem starts, is that like at its core, if you try to approach it kind of in like a randomized or fair, like mathematically, logically fair fashion, you're not going to wind up with something that's diverse.
Yeah. So but what does that mean, I guess? Are you just basing it off like population? Like,
yeah. So like
but do you base it off population that are that learn how to do visual effects or post-production, or you base it on population that actually live around like the country?
Yeah.
It's like, so like, well, that's kind of where that's kind of my question, is that like, where are we becoming not diverse? Is it the fact that we're the pool from which we choose people is not diverse? How do you change that pool? Does it have to do with who gets into colleges that graduate people that wind up working in this business? What do you guys think? Anybody can start, however you guys want to approach it.
I feel like Leslie should start.
I feel sure. I mean, I feel like part of it is school. Like I feel like the arts and sciences, or whatever this counts as, a mix of art and tech, really appeals to a certain demographic of people based on, what opportunities they have available and what they're exposed to. I honestly think that that's probably something that's getting better now, just because of the internet and just because media and nerdy things like what we do in VFX is just becoming more popular. I mean, I remember growing up and in middle school, it was weird for a girl like me to be into things that had magic or sci-fi in it. And I was just reading books. Everyone's allowed to read a book. Everyone's given books at school, no matter where you come from, as long as you're in school. But that was weird. And the fact that I was into any sort of computer art was also kind of weird for where I was. But I feel like there's a lot more encouragement and interest and exposure to computer arts and fantastical media now than there ever was before. In general, there's so much more content now. Like, I couldn't find enough sci-fi and anime and fantasy things when I was a kid to enjoy myself. And now there's too much.
Yeah. I love that term, fantastical media. I don't think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, when Harry Potter suddenly became mainstream, and I was like, wait, it was the person that got made fun of for liking dragons for forever. Now all of you regular people like this too? The ones who all made fun of me? Okay, fine. Yeah. More for me, but still,
So you're saying that like there's definitely like an issue with just, there's a stigma, like before people even enter kind of the educational realm, like go to college to study these fields, which is like either visual effects or art or computer graphics, right? Which is on like the STEM field. There's right off the bat, there's kind of a filtering process that occurs because of just like stigmas that exist.
Yeah, and just not knowing that this even is a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know. Go for it.
So do you think that like a lot of it has to do with like people just not even knowing that this is a thing? Like, are we collectively failing at just advertising visual effects as like a real field?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think for me, this is tough because I've done like a couple of these diversity panels. I even have like episodes I've done of like my own podcast on this thing. And like, it's like, the more you think about like diversity, like just like very broadly, you realize that like it is such a big, broad kind of like umbrella to just be like, there is a diversity issue, you know, like, because there's a diversity issue everywhere, like in every aspect of anything, you know, like I think sometimes it makes it a little easier to like, when you started saying the population thing, you could say that, okay, if we're like generalizing just population in the United States, you know, like you could say the 13% of the population is African-American. Why aren't there 13% of visual effects artists like African-American? You know, I know, I think I'm pretty sure it's below that, but I feel like that's just kind of a difficult thing to say, that why shouldn't it just be like that? Because the problem is so complicated. It has not only to do with race, it has to do with class, it has to do with access. It's like a multi-pronged issue, you know, that can't just be like, oh, we have a diversity problem, so like, let's find more Black people, and, you know, let's find more women, you know, like, I feel like for me, when I think about the diversity thing, I think the women thing, when like, because there's like class diversity, there's cultural diversity, there's gender diversity. I feel like the woman, like the aspect that there is like not as many women compared to men, that is an easier thing to kind of even sometimes talk about, because it's like gender, which is like a little bit easier to wrap your head around as far as like how that affects like an industry, you know, how that could be something that could be like solved. Because once you get into like the racial aspect, I think race also has to do with class a lot of the time. And so that becomes a very complex thing to talk about. And that's, you could do like a whole like 3-hour like lecture thing on like just specifically like race and like diversity and race in different industries. But generally, I've always found, like, from conversations I've had over the years, you know, like, it's generally a combination of issues, you know, it's like a combination of access, you know, and by access, I mean, like, as a Black person, and I try to always frame things in like context of like myself, you know, because that's the only like experience I have. I can't speak for other groups of people. I can't speak honestly for really anyone else but myself, you know, but I know, like, from my experience when I was growing up, where I went to school, like culturally, even within my own culture, like, it was not cool, you know, to be into computers, you know, like, as a Black kid growing up, it was like, if you wanted to be cool, you had to play, like, you had to be a rapper or you had to play sports, you know, and this is kind of like something that also has to do with like marketing to like different races, like what is cool and what is that has to do with like media and things like that, which makes it even more complicated, you know, like it's like what's sold to people, you know, what your family tells you is good, you should be doing, you know. Right. And so I feel like, yeah, it's a combination of like access, you know, what kids are exposed to when they're in school, what neighborhoods they live in, you know. I think not only access, but like class, you know, does your family have enough money to get you a computer? Especially for me, when I was a kid, like, to be able to do the things I'm doing now, I would have needed to like have had a computer. And we did end up getting a computer at one point, but I never thought of it as like a thing that I wanted to do, like, or play around with to get into, you know, like visual effects and stuff. Not in the beginning anyways, not until my mom was like, hey, I'm going to put you, my high school that I went to when I was growing up was not, they didn't have anything. They had like a TV program, but they didn't have anything like filmmaking or anything to do with like film editing or anything to do with like post-production. So I ended up having to do, they had like a TV film. They had like a TV production class, which I actually was a part of, but they didn't have like a filmmaking course or anything like that. You know, I had to be sent to, my mom ended up putting me in a like half-day art school, you know, that was basically like a magnet school that brought in kids from different neighborhoods, different classes, different races. to learn about the arts, you know? And that was like one of the things that I felt like were not valued in the beginning when I was going to school, was like the arts did not seem so cool. And you had to kind of be lucky to have parents that were like, hey, like I'm down to have you go and like play around and do stuff like with computers and like act and do theater stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's complicated. I think it has to do with access. It has to do with class. It has to do with, you know, like who your friends are, who you surround yourself with. But also there are legitimate barriers to entry because, you know, I think a lot of times the delusion for people that are in power or are in the industry is that diversity doesn't really have anything to do with them. You know, a long time, like not a long time ago, but like 2013, I posed this question on the VFX Reddit and I got like destroyed. Like it was before the Black Lives Matter stuff happened. You can even look it up. It was like one of the
I read your post.
ranked,
I saw that.
You seen it? Yeah.
I
It
knew
was
it
like
was
one
you
of the
too.
highest ranked VFX like Reddit posts. And I just simply was asking like, why aren't there as many VFX supervisors and like, what could we do? And I got all this stuff from like people giving me information about the population and how population, if all things were equal, it should be 13% population. I was like, okay, yeah, that's fair, but it's less than that now. And I don't see any of them. I don't know any of them, you know, and I wasn't necessarily trying to like solve the issue there. I just wanted people to like just start a conversation about it because I just wanted to figure out like what people thought about it. And I think a lot of people that were there took it very personal and felt like I was attacking their credibility as visual effects supervisors or artists. And the funny thing is, like when the George Floyd stuff happened and everybody started becoming like woke and started reading about diversity and started reading about like classism and started reading about like access, you know, like to education, all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 years later, the same people that were saying like, this is ridiculous, visual effects, people kept saying to me, visual effects has nothing to do with class or there are no barriers to entry. It's all about your skill level. And if you're good enough, you'll get hired and become a VFX supervisor. If there aren't as many Black people or there aren't as many women, it's because they weren't good enough to make the cut. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, do you know how much luck it takes to become like a VFX supervisor? You have to have like really great mentors. You have to have people that believe in you. You have to have like the will and the energy to like want to push yourself. And it's really, really freaking hard. And if you don't have like people behind you supporting you and like a community of people saying that, hey, it doesn't matter where you're from or whatever, like it's not going to happen. But yeah, long story short, half of those people all of a sudden flipped their belief on it because Black guy died. And so everybody felt like, oh, now if I say something negative, I'm not necessarily saying that. I think a lot of people did open their eyes to that there are general, like really barriers to entry for like men, women, like racial barriers, class barriers that do affect people that are beyond anyone's control. And the problem sometimes can be so big that I feel like it's always important to try to like focus on like this more narrower like spectrum of it and try to figure out like what you can do better to like help open doors for people, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key thing though is remembering the opening doors part though. Like I think before Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, people forgot that somebody needs to open the door for those people who are skilled enough to stand out at all in an industry like VFX. But this industry is so based on mentorship anyway.
Yeah.
Like you don't move up, you don't network, you don't get around the industry in a positive way without doing well, sure. But then you also need people to continue to mentor you and continue to push you and promote your name to either, you know, other studios or to the producers or the hiring people or the other supervisors who would even notice you.
Yeah.
Like I think the subtle sexism and racism and gender divides that exist there are often forgotten because it's just so much more abstract than you do good, you move up. This industry really is heavily based more than I think people want to admit, especially I think people who are already in positions of power in this industry care to admit, and when you do really grill them on an interview about that, they'll always say like, well, so-and-so mentored me. They took me under their wing. I as somebody who grew up in this industry for the last, it's been 12 something plus years.
Oh, gee.
For me, I kind of noticed that it was really hard for me to just happen to have somebody who wanted to mentor me to get somewhere further in this industry. It was always a big fight, or it was overlooked quite a lot, actually. I know of peers in this industry right now who have admitted that they didn't think much of me, whereas around me, I'd see lots of other males who maybe either were just as good or maybe I felt not quite as good because I would be picking up their shots, get invited out to the drinks where it was just the guys and then get promoted and moved up, or, have their name just given out a little bit more freely than say mine.
Yeah. And I think on top of that, I feel like the problem is like when you have like a system or a culture already that is kind of entrenched or ingrained in like the way it does things, it's not self-aware of its biases. That's why I call it like unbiased, or
it's the unconscious bias.
The unconscious bias, like you're not aware of it like as an individual, but like the industry, I think in general, really, or even on a company level, people, your company's probably not aware of it, as a company, it's unconscious. That's the whole point of it, and like you have to get to the conscious part, you have to really like be like self-analyzing, be like, are we actually doing the best we can be doing? Are we actually inviting people that look different than us? Are we overlooking people that look different than us? Because listen, I've always felt like that. I always felt like I was like raised to feel like everyone is born with the same like ability, not necessarily, not talking about like physical, but anyone that doesn't have any kind of like legitimate physical or mental impairment, I think as long as the person can like, and this is how I personally feel about it, as long as the person like is willing to work hard, willing to learn, they can be just as good as any Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor, any Oscar-winning director or whatever, like people learn, and you can't expect people like that don't know anything about what you do. I always catch myself doing that. Like I look at people's work sometimes and I'm like, oh, that's not that great. I'm like, oh, but they're like 1 year out of school. Like, what am I talking about? Like you like have to look at potential, and you have to look at like not only potential, but also people's attitudes and effort, because that's a big part of it. And I think a lot of the times people get overlooked because, somebody that's been working in the industry for like 20 years will look at something and be like, that's not great, they're trash, like instead of looking at like opportunity, like possibility, and looking at like their work ethic, their drive, their passion. I think passion is a huge part of it. And I think anybody that has the passion, the willingness, and is like capable can be just as good as any of us. There are like hundreds of people that like, if they worked probably for like 10 years, kick my ass as a visual effects supervisor, and I think that's like to pretend like, because you have a certain title, or to pretend that you are working on a certain show or you have a certain opportunity means that you have some innate skill or innate talent that makes you way better than anybody else, I think is like a huge flaw. And it's a huge misconception. Everybody's human and we all bleed blood. We all like, if you care about something enough and you work hard at it, like you can be just as good as any other visual effects supervisor or artist in the world, Yeah.
Before I say anything, Oz, do you want to add something as well?
No, I totally agree on that. I think everybody has the same abilities. That was a big issue with me growing up, because in Italy, when you're a kid, and you're not as good as an adult.
Experience, like
for no reason, but because I since I always play with computers and stuff, I developed quickly like a skill that most adults didn't have, but they were not acknowledging it. in any sense.
Yeah.
I think my main issue, like obviously white guy, very, very easy to get into the business. But like my main issues coming from like outside the US was actually just knowing that you can do this. Nobody in Italy tells you like you can work in movies or you can work in video games. Like for me already wanting to work in video games was like I was lucky that I had a connection in the United States that I could come to the United States. So it's like okay, and I have maybe a possibility to find job in that field.
I would say like for me, that's one of like my gripes about our industry sometimes is that like we do a piss poor job at like advertising like how cool our jobs are and like how lucky we are to be able to do what we do. Like I didn't really know much about visual effects. So like I like stumbled into the computer animation major at my school, like almost by accident because like they put me in computer animation when I was supposed to be a film major. And I took like 2 classes and I was like, oh, this is cool. I can do filmmaking, but in a computer and I don't have to go outside and deal with all the gear and stuff, so that, it was like kind of like by laziness. I was like, all right, I'll just ride with this for a little bit and see how it goes. But yeah, we do a pretty piss poor job. The only time like people really know about it is like I feel like for the most part when I was growing up, especially, I just knew about Pixar. I thought that was all you could. I was like, I got to work at Pixar. That's where all the computer animation stuff is. So if I want to do visual effects or computer stuff, I got to work at Pixar. But I didn't know about like live action visual effects and any of that stuff. It wasn't really sold really well. And I think we do a bad job as an industry to show like how sexy and cool and fun and like collaborative our work is, like.
But also I think we do a very poor job advertising it to girls or to minorities.
Yeah.
Because
I think the unfortunate thing is when you do a bad job advertising to the population, what more than will you do a bad job to all the other minorities that exist out there, be they women or a certain ethnicity or race? Like I remember being in school and I didn't know that there is such a thing as live action compositing work. I'd initially gone to a different school than where I graduated because I wanted to, I'd heard of Pixar and that looked really cool and wanted to do it, but I played a lot of video games. So I had my eyes set on Blizzard and was like, okay, computer animation's the thing. And all I even knew about the industry was animating. Didn't know that there's so many different disciplines in it. And, finally, now that I'm in the industry, I think it's amazing the amount of diversity in terms of talent that exists in here that create the whole giant village that is VFX, from riggers to programmers to producers to coordinators to project managers to even just department coordinators. Like there's so many jobs in here other than just the person who can, I don't know, make a character dance.
Yeah.
And when I first looked at this whole thing, that's all I thought there was.
It's funny. I wonder why that is. I think it's literally because of Pixar, because I felt the same way. I was just like character animation. I was like, it's the only thing I want to be an animator. That everyone, and even I feel like outside of our industry, people that are kind of like the uninitiated in visual effects, like they also know about animation. They think about animation and they think about character. Because my mom, since for my whole life, she still thinks I do animation. I talk to her about it and she knows what I do. Same. She's seen my work. I've shown her breakdowns.
Disney is so good at advertising. If you think about it, now that I remember, I only knew about it because they would talk about the behind the scenes stuff all the time. And it was always the animators went and watched Deer a whole lot. Yeah. So that's how we got Bambi. Yeah. And then Pixar is like very good at the press. Like it really is they really highlight it. And then that is all they talk about, but they don't talk about the lighters. They don't talk about what it takes to get an effect sim going.
Yeah.
You get to hear about all that cool stuff in SIGGRAPH, for instance, but that's kind of about it. That doesn't really get showcased unless, it's a Mandalorian. It's a bunch of directors sitting at their round table talking about how great the virtual wall is.
But it's like a marketing thing, isn't it? Because they're just able to like really sell the fact that animation technically is like what brings the characters to life, right? And it's like, it's almost like magic, because the thing is dead, it can't move, but we move it and we bring it to life. So the other departments just are not as magical, you know, like.
I'm realizing now that it's probably has a lot to do with the fact that Pixar were the only people to have like a title opener. Right. If you really think about it, like
yes.
if you kind of go back there, Pixar, when the Pixar movie starts, it starts with, you know, that lamp bouncing and it jumps onto the peak. And like, who else was doing that? That was like a, you know, a visual effects entity.
That's true.
I mean, yeah, I think that's true. But also, yeah, Pixar was its own company, right? There weren't like companies that worked as studios. I mean, I knew Blue Sky, right?
Yeah.
Blue Sky also had like their own, like you knew the visual effects companies. Well, they're like animation studios, you know, that they were actually studios making their own films. And this was something I talked to a friend about a while ago. I was like, visual effects. I mean, there's like Blur Studios. I think they make their own visual effects films as well. So like, but they're not as popular as like Blue Sky or Pixar. But I always felt like visual effects artists are filmmakers in their own right, and that they should create their own films, you know, like, and they should market them and put them out there. That's the way I feel like you get some kind of leverage, and then you can market them the way you want. And then you can be like, oh, like visual effects artists or visual effects supervisors or whatever are storytellers in their own right. And that's how I feel like you can reclaim some of that story or that narrative of like what it is, what that's cool. You know, imagine a kid being like, oh, like this guy does visual effects. He made a film and this is who he is. And I could do that. You know, when you see directors, that's what you like. You're like, oh, this director is a filmmaker. They make a film, they put it out there, and they do it with a cast and crew. And animation studios, I feel like is the same thing. They're like, oh, they made this amazing animated film. It's the story of the film that like captures everyone's imagination. Right. So imagine if like you were like a visual effects artist and you were like, I made my own visual effects film and I put it out there. You know, I got a camera, shot some stuff, had a story, put it together, and you sold that and made it and put it out there. People would be like, oh, who is this guy? Oh, he's a visual effects artist. Oh, visual effects artists make movies? That would be so cool.
Yeah.
I think one of the only few times I heard about that was the guy who did District 9.
Yeah.
You know, and even then it wasn't really as popularized as I wish it could have been.
And the guy, you know who else did that? The guy from Maze Runner. The guy that made Maze Runner. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's his name? Something Ball?
I forget.
Or something.
I know about that,
Yeah.
See, if we don't even know, then that's a problem.
Wes Ball, I think is his name. I'm saying Wes. I'm calling Wes Ball.
So you think that the problem is the movie studios approach at like finding the one single hero man kind of thing, you know, like because the movie studios are like, you know, the director makes the movie, but and the actors, like without realizing that, like, you know, if only those two really don't make a movie.
Yeah, like is the diversity problem trying to create a more diverse environment, is it really an issue of us just being kind of pushed to the background?
It's like 100 issues. It's not just one. Yeah. It's like it's just part of it, you know, like
it's like part of it.
You got to be working on like all of them at the same time. It's like access, it's like selling yourself, it's like, you know,
and like the industry not selling itself.
Like totally. I think it's like 100 things at the same time. And that's definitely the way it is. And it's really hard to like, that's why I said, like, once you start getting into it and you're thinking about it, it's so complicated. Like you can't just try to put it in one box or say that there's this one thing that would help solve diversity, because it's just too big. It's, you know, it's just too big.
Is there anything you guys have seen just from your experience that you thought was really effective or very, you know, potent at solving problem, like something in the hiring process, something that you saw somebody else do? Like, have you ever seen like a company like make a really big change that you thought would help a lot?
No, not a company that is like already established. I mean, for me, I think the something that I've seen that has like, I think is like probably more effective is schools or like almost nonprofits that open up that are like bringing kids in to teach them about animation and visual effects and trying to funnel them into the industry. I think that's probably like the most effective thing that I've seen from like a boots on the ground or like a, you know, like kind of like a green roots kind of grassroots kind of like like trying to fix the issue of diversity. I think, that's probably the most effective.
Yeah, I think exposure really is it. Not to plug the company that I work at, but I was on an interview a while back over some horror movie that I'd done with Crafty just like a couple of years ago or so, and one of the owners was on it, and I'd kind of just noticed through being here for a little bit that I was surprised at how many artists are in this company that haven't really gone to school for it. And Crafty has its biggest studio over in Atlanta, where I was always surprised that anyone could ever build anything there, considering that there wasn't that much of a VFX hub at the time. And Chris Ledoux, the owner, was talking about how what he likes to do is just kind of give people a chance that didn't seem like that they should have that chance. And I thought that was kind of really cool. And it made me think a lot about my own background in getting here. I had no intention of being a supervisor. I think I was probably overlooked for it too for quite a while. And this industry is kind of tough. So I was in that boat of, I'm just going to be a senior artist, freelance around. I don't want that kind of responsibility. And and then they hired me and sort of like coached me into doing it. I like to say that I was tricked into doing it because I didn't want to. But it wasn't until that interview, just like when was that? I think that was last year when I did it. It's like, oh, that's right. That's how I got my chance, and I wasn't going to get that chance. And it was just because somebody just thought to do something a little bit different. Because on paper, I think there's a lot of us here who wouldn't have made sense to be given the position that we were given, or given that opportunity, to be trained and turn into something more than what others would have thought we would be capable of.
Yeah. It sucks too, because a lot of people are just not like very personable. People that could be like super talented visual effects artists. I find sometimes that people like that are drawn to creative industries, sometimes are not the best socially or communicating, which sucks, because like part of getting a job or part of just navigating the world as an adult is being able to like properly communicate and being able to like communicate with other people. And like, it's the interpersonal skills, and people a lot of the times will hire someone because they like them. And luckily, like for me, I've been pretty lucky that I'm like good at like getting people to like me, that's like one of my strengths, honestly. Like, I think like 50-60% of like my success has been being able to get people to like me. And that's a lot of my job also as like a visual effects supervisor. It's like getting people to like me, getting them to feel comfortable about what we're doing. And then me and my team and whatever, we figure out how to solve the problem for them, and a lot of people don't have those skills that would allow them to get that first opportunity. And some people are just not great at selling themselves. Some people feel uncomfortable about it, but that's why I always try to go back to the thing is just like, like screw that. Like you could do just as good as a job as anybody that is like a fucking incredible. Oh, sorry for my language, but like that is like a super senior visual effects supervisor or a CEO or whatever. Like you can't think that those people have some whispering angel, like giving them like the intel that you would never be able to have. They're just as capable, and you're just as capable as them, and that's what I think is important to always remember. Yeah.
Do you guys ever feel like educational institutions like colleges that, usually like SVA, SCAD, RISD, those guys, NYU, that have visual effects programs, do they hurt or help? What do you guys think?
I don't know. I never went to one, so I really speak about it. Like, I think they're great. But for like teaching, I think they're great funnels, like for, like bringing people in and attracting them. But like part of my problem with it is like when you talk about diversity, some of these schools are impossible for any kid I know growing up from where I'm at to go, like $50,000 a year. No snub to them, it's those schools have to make money, and that's how they operate to be able to, keep going and teach people stuff. But that's why I was saying like for me, something like the animation project. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's like it's like a nonprofit in the city. Like a friend, Kat, Kat, right? Leslie, like Kat Gulachi. I think she's like a professor or on the board or something, but like she works there. And those places are awesome because the kids that go there don't have the money to be able to go to SVA. You know, their parents can't pay $50,000, $60,000 a year. And, you know, for me, one of the most insane things about this industry when it comes to like the education aspect, I'm glad those schools exist because kids are learning, people are learning. But for me, it becomes another kind of like diversity barrier, but it's more on the class level because I don't know any kids that I know from where I'm growing up that could afford to go to a school like that unless they have like a really big scholarship. So it's a little problematic in my eyes, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I mean, I don't have the best view of schools, but in general.
But then also for me,
I
think for me also the crazy thing for me is like we do something that's like kind of fun. It's like art. We're not like saving lives. We're not like lawyers that get like doctorates. Like we're storytellers. We're we're like artists. We're like creatives. And so to find out, like I had a friend that worked at my old place, MPC, with me, and she had graduated out of school, and she told me she had like a $200,000 student loan debt or student debt from going to art school. I was like, that is bananas. What? I was like, I was in shock. I was like, how are you going to get out of this debt? Like then now this becomes a thing where like you're afraid to be able to take risks or maybe jump to a job where you might get a bigger opportunity because you're like trapped by this loan. And I was like, man, like I learned almost most of my stuff on the job or like through the internet. So it just becomes this weird, crazy world where I feel like we're like deluding ourselves about like institutions and stuff that are like obviously teaching kids great stuff, but is it worth 200 grand, go into debt for 200 grand and come out of school for like a $40,000 job a year if you're lucky? You know, like I feel like some places try to pay you even less as like an entry level compositor or animator. You come out, you have that much. And then to do it in like New York, I was like, this is bananas. She's going to be in debt for like 20 years. Like,
For me, it was 11 years. That was pretty much my story.
I think these schools are good if, you know, it's the only opportunity that you have to understand that this exists. But I'm sure none of those schools would be happy to know that if any one of those people just approached a VFX studio who's desperate for work, which I feel like is a lot of them, and there's so many companies that there's bound to be somebody out there who's willing to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to try this person out. I can train anybody to learn nuke and be on the box, but it takes, you know, there's certain kinds of moxie that actually makes an artist good.
Yeah.
You know, that stuff could easily be learned without paying the $200K that we all get for college.
I feel like take a effects PhD course, $60 a month, you get all the classes. Like, no offense to those schools, but like, I probably never get invited back to SVA after this, but like, you know, just pay like $60 for effects PhD course. And, you know, like you learn so much. You go through all of those classes, you come out with a kick-ass reel. Who's not going to hire you? If we're going to say that it's like a meritocracy, it's really about the skill level and like the work you can produce. Take all those courses, see what you can make. I bet you your shit will look good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where VFX companies could advertise just, hey, learn a bit of nuke. The tutorials at the Foundry are free. Just learn how to push the buttons. And then, I mean, I know I would gladly take anybody who showed that kind of interest and
learn how
see where they go from there.
Know some stuff.
I remember when I was at SVA, right? So I was one of those kids where I got like into way too much debt, and like everything Bilal is saying is absolutely true. Like years later, I was like, I learned a lot more from FX PhD than I probably did at SVA. But well, there's two things. So like one thing is that probably the most important thing I learned at SVA was not from any of the teachers, but was from one of the managers there, and he basically just told me to read the manual. I literally read like the Maya manual.
You might have had the same teacher.
That's pretty much It was just like, just read the manual. It's free. They tell you how to use the software. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
So that,
I read the Shake manual. The Shake manual actually had a lot of tips and tricks on how to composite things.
Right. These manuals teach you how to comp.
Of course it did. It literally made for the program that you're trying to learn in class.
But like it actually like taught you like for no reason whatsoever, but it actually taught you the math behind the node. Yeah. Just so that you knew what the node was doing, but you didn't really need to, you know.
Yeah. If you want to learn cinematography, just read like the manual to a camera. Yeah. Read the manual to a camera. They'll teach you how to like light and everything. It's just like, oh, you want your camera
I paid all this money to go to school for them to tell me to read this book, and then we didn't even go over the book at all in my classes. But one teacher did tell me to read the manual, and it was the manuals and this guy.
I read that.
Was it a certain manual?
Everybody should read that book, by the way. That's an amazing book. I read that book like early on too. It was amazing.
Yeah. I read a book about directing instead. Which was very useful though, because I learned all about cameras and lenses, and it's still a very useful thing for a compositor to know.
The one thing I'll give SVA, which was very useful, is that I kind of walked out of that department with a network in place. Yeah. Like I started working immediately, right? And just to be fair, like, you know, I think the program started with like 120 people and like 28 graduated or something.
Yeah.
So like it was not easy. Like I barely even remember my senior year because I didn't sleep.
I don't know if I remember it being very easy. I think it was just the paywall, to be honest. I mean, I slept through all my classes and I learned most of the stuff from the tutorial that were on the server. I think the paywall, though, is what like really.
I know who I should actually be working with now.
I mean, I wish SVA had like you don't need like a box, you know, computer per student, because like I mean I cannot even afford a box computer now if I wanted to. Like I rather built in myself. Yeah, BOXX, like that. That's a very expensive company. Like, so I don't think anybody like, not every student needs that. If they could just like find a way that is to make it a little bit more like financially approachable.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like learn how to composite first before you buy a box computer. Like, you know, like, or learn how to light or learn how to animate first before you worry about buying a expensive machine. Like that stuff will come. And I mean, to when you're working at a studio too, you're not using your own computer, you know, it's like,
right. Also.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about kind of plays into a lot of the stuff that's happening now with like things moving to the cloud, you know, working from home, all these things that are kind of happening globally where, you know, you kind of don't need your own hardware, really, right? You're just like streaming other people's hardware. You can hire people globally now, right? So the pool is much wider than before. Like when I graduated from SVA, like people hired just like whoever was in New York, you know, specifically Manhattan, kind of on certain streets, right? But now the pool is very broad. Do you guys think a lot of the stuff that's happening right now is going to improve things dramatically? Or is there some kind of pitfall somewhere that we're not seeing as it pertains to having a more diverse workforce or, you know, better workforce?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like every change or whatever is going to have like positive and negative consequences, intended and unintended consequences. I think people, I think obviously, I think opening things up to like a global like workforce is obviously a great thing because it's more access to talent, more access to, you know, like resources, you know, and the fact that we're doing like a remote workflow for, I mean, most of the studios that I know about, means that people don't have to people that don't have access to like really fast machines or whatever will be able to tap into like the company's machines and company's hardware to be able to work. So that makes it easier. But, you know, I don't know what the unintended consequences of this is going to be in maybe like 6-7 years, you know, any choice, any decision, and something that's like as big as like our entire industry shifting to remote workflow, there are going to be negative consequences that we don't know about. And some of them that we're probably already kind of feeling, like, but yeah, I'm not sure about all of them.
I think it's just going to promote, I think it will heavily promote more outsourced vendors, like what you're just talking about, like working in, I think companies that are in, India or China or any of those, because everybody will get more used to everyone being remote. I mean,
It's
I know
cheaper,
for it's a lot cheaper. I'd say when I'm supervising my jobs, there's a good chunk of work that I'm already outsourcing that I know traditionally would have gone to some of the bread and butter folks here in New York City, but it's so expensive here. And for me as a supervisor, that's a lot more energy and effort on my part, having to note it over and over again, as opposed to sending it to an outsourced vendor that I trust and know will deliver something back with probably minimal notes. And at least they're very much on the hook to get that done. There was a really interesting interview I'd listened to. I think it was like a TED Talk or something, or it might've been an article that was talking about not the VFX industry, but it was an Indian company that was complaining about, I think, the culture of outsource that was hurting, I think, moving up their industry further, that their company, and especially India, would then only be considered as the place where you send like the grunt work to. And that was such a detriment because it meant that they would have that reputation, never be able to like reach further, and conversely too, like for anyone here, you could argue that if you're outsourcing the things that, could be done by others, then that leaves room for you to do the harder stuff or the more creative work. People talk about what is creativity, and could creativity as we know it, with the rise of even AI systems and algorithms and apps that could do what we used to think was creative, actually open us up as like a human race to something even more creative that we haven't even realized. And that can even be something as base as like catchy sounding music or really, really great artwork. The painters of old used to think that a great artist had to hand make their own paint. It's a lot of energy to devote into learning how to do that, as opposed to just being able to put pencil to paper, or now digital pen to digital paper, and have all the world of oil paints and knives and all of that at your disposal that you didn't really have to learn how to do. You can just make cool art now.
I suppose, it's also like it's a process or appreciation of process sometimes, I think for me, like a lot of the times when I think about, like outsourcing roto and outsourcing paint, that's most of like, and tracking, like a lot of that stuff gets outsourced. And I like, for me, I guess it's like just the talent thing when I'm thinking about it. Like, I feel like some of that skills that you learn in like rotoing and painting and like watching your edges, like that stuff is hard to find, because I feel like I'm banging my head at people. I'm like, look how bad your edge is. And like, people just a lot of artists, I think, just don't spend hours and hours staring at edges the way you would be staring at an edge if you were doing roto or paint work for like 3 years before you get into it, And
there are good foundational disciplines to learn from it. And I wonder though, if, even if all of this outsourcing is happening, that there might be a little bit of a return to having some of that in here, because I don't know if you've experienced this, but like all the outsourced vendors are so full. Their turnaround times are heavy. And if they aren't able to deliver it properly, who has to do it? It's somebody in-house. So you can't not have that discipline existing within your own house.
And that's
so it's a little bit of a trap.
That's what I'm saying. It feels like a trap sometimes, because I have like 2 guys that I can trust to do like really complicated paint in-house. And if they're busy on something else, I'm screwed. Like I have to do it or something, like, and I think part of the problem is like, you're like, man, it's like, like this is definitely it's a great resource to be able to get things done quickly and cheaply and being able to do this. But like that weakening of people's skills is not great, because I compare it to the fucking pandemic. Like when people didn't have any face masks because the United States realized that they had sent all of their manufacturing to China, and you're in a global pandemic and doctors need face masks and gowns, and we can't produce any in the United States because like it's all outsourced. And literally everybody was like, oh my God, these doctors don't have enough face masks because none of them are here. And because of the pandemic, we're not allowing people to fly to China. We're not allowing things from China to come to us. What do? You know?
You know, what's ironic about that? So I have a bunch of family in China, and when the pandemic was hitting there back in October of 2019, they were actually asking us in the United States to send them masks because even though those masks are manufactured in China, because they sent them all here, the Chinese didn't even have access to it. So, you know, sure, it costs like whatever pennies to make there, but then it gets shipped to the United States, and I was buying them here and sending it back to China, to the normal people who weren't in manufacturing, who just needed them for coronavirus.
Yeah. Do you guys think that maybe one way to resolve this issue is to try to alleviate the stigma that outsourced vendors have, which is that, you know, that they just do grunt work? Like, do you ever see yourself sending like bigger work to outsourced vendors? Almost in an attempt to kind of level the playing field so that it's not just like, oh, here's the people doing the hard work and here's the people doing the not hard work.
I think you could, but like, then it's the point. It's like, what's the point of me actually doing it? You know, I would just be like, why don't they just do it? You know, they should just be getting the job. I think if they're just better than us and they can just do it, they should just be getting the job and they should be working on it. Well, like, what's the point of being like, oh, I'm going to win this thing and I'm going to give the whole job and like the whole comp and all of the CG and everything to them. And I'm just going to review it. Like, what do I even have people at my company doing? You know, are we just like checking final shots? You know, I think there should be, and this is where I feel a little torn sometimes, because I'm like, okay, the reason we're using them is because we have this globalization mindset that it's like a economic thing to try to continue to get more and more profit. And the best way to do that is to find cheap labor, right? Cheap labor, no matter what. Find cheaper artists. This is part of like the manufacturing, you know, like economic boom of like sneakers and fashion or whatever. I mean, it's come to visual effects the same way, because it's literally just about finding people anywhere in the world that are cheaper, that can do something. But I think it's really important for places and studios and companies to be like, hey, like maybe this amount of money is okay. You know, we don't need to every year or year after year try to like be more and more profitable. And this goes to like more of like a bigger kind of like societal, like consumerism thing. But like, I think it's important to think like it's nice sometimes to just be like, yeah, we just need to make enough money to make sure everyone's paid. The company keeps running. We're doing great work and people are doing like this work local. Like, what is wrong with that? I don't understand like the unending chase for money and the unending chase for like profits. I don't necessarily think is great. And I think that's part of the problem when I think of like really big visual effects, like conglomerates that are just swallowing other companies, trying to make more money, trying to squeeze more profits. It's like, is this like, where does it end? You know, because for me, I don't think anything really ends, but I think like what's more important to me is sustainability. And what seems sustainable is to have like the work being able to be done by the artists that are working on it, you know? And yes, you use an outside vendor or resource if you really necessarily need to, you know, or if it's really important to the job, but I don't think it's good to sacrifice the skills or sacrifice how well people can understand like roto or paint or tracking, because I think those foundations are necessary to just being a good artist. And to like try to pretend like, oh yeah, like we'll just have everyone skip all that shit and just become mid and senior artists and they'll just be able to see good edges and good comps or whatever, I think is BS. It's like I haven't experienced that. I have so many guys that are like senior mid artists that they couldn't spot like a bad edge if it was like slapping them in the face. And I'm like, it's either you're like lazy or you really can't see it. And is that because you just haven't spent that much time staring at edges? Like when I was working on stuff, I'd zoom in like 300% and look at the edge and work on it. I don't know how people work and look at stuff, but the reason I did that was because my edges had to be like pixel or 2 pixels off. You know, they had to work for shots. And I don't think people spend that much time doing that stuff.
I think it's up to supervisors in the culture at a studio to make sure that stuff's still gets learned and that stuff is still considered important. I don't know. I feel like it's the key thing is balance, right? And for those who can discipline their team to confront them about it and be like, this, I don't care if you say you're a senior, if you can't get this right, it doesn't count. And it does mean trying to step back and learn the foundations. Because at the end of the day too, I do think maybe this is a little bit too optimistic and it's only going to take decades to accomplish that. Even with the globalization of visual effects, all of us are human, and no matter where you are in the world, everybody wants to better their lives.
Yeah.
So maybe, it's cheaper for somebody in a third world country to do your paint work or your DMP work, but they all want to do some bigger stuff too. The really good people, they're going to want to do something more. And they're also going to want to be able to provide for their family and have some work-life balance and make more and have nice things. And that my hope eventually, since VFX just seems to be at such a deficit for talent in general, no matter what discipline you do, that perhaps it will even out. Although I think I said this about like 8 years ago. But rates are going up higher. The vendors are actually more expensive now, the outsourced vendors.
Yeah. I mean, I even think it'd be interesting, maybe just like staff, like 5 people from India, just help work on.
I would love to. I would love to be able to have like the visas work out better to like, take anyone from another country.
Because they're already remote, right? Like we're already remote. If you could get visas for them, they could come to the company, they can work, they can learn how to become great compositors and stuff. I feel like that's a truly global like visual effects company, like not just being like, we have these vendors that just do like cheap roto paint and track. It's like, no, we're taking the talent, we're bringing them into our companies and we're building strong, sustainable companies that have strong painters and strong roto departments, rather than just being like, this is just a roto company. This is just a paint company. This is just a tracking company.
I mean, I hate to say it, but maybe MPC really had the right idea.
Creating the
making
school.
their own.
Their school,
I mean,
right?
Not just their school. I mean, just how much they invested in bringing up MPC Bangalore or bringing up other divisions that are still under the umbrella. So they're still part of the company and really expanding the disciplines that they gave them. So I don't know. I feel like when we left, Bilali, they were getting really good at effects and getting really good at animation and getting really good at DMPs and
they're getting good at
pretty
CG,
good comps.
They were. Maybe.
And like maybe the answer to diversity in general is more globalization and VFX companies investing in other areas to expand their talent pool, but underneath their wing, not as outsourced, vendors, but as part as them.
I think definitely. I think that is, I think you might be hitting it on the head.
And for those countries too, that's also a way for them to increase diversity as well, getting in touch with something outside of their borders where, for the most part, like a lot of other countries tend to be very homogenous. Like you could say that the United States or maybe cities like London and all that, they're not quite as homogenous. It's actually a little bit more diverse. Whereas say, China, it's pretty much just one majority there. India, there's lots of different cultures, but it's still not quite as diverse as say here as far as race goes.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And for them that would create a cultural diversification even of gender roles for the few gender diversity that we have here. That mix could be good for all of us. But again, what I'm talking about is something that's like decades in the future.
No, but that's kind of right. That's where does it start? So the idea is that if you got rid of like this mothership model, right, where you have like like the mothership that exists in LA or New York, and then you have the outsourced vendors, the way you guys are talking about. If you get rid of that model, you essentially assimilate. You would have to build a culture as a company that assimilates.
Yeah, you can still have the mothership. Yeah, I think you just add to it, right? You
expand the mothership.
Yeah.
What was my question? So labor is one thing, right? Like you can keep trying to find cheaper labor, and there's like good and bad things about that, and there's ways to approach it that are smart. Is there any other way is there some kind of corner in visual effects or post-production where there's cost savings to be had that people are not taking advantage of? You guys think? Like I always thought that, like, for example, like when things went to cloud, like that's something me and Oz started working on is that you can save a lot of money by just not having an office, right? Because computing is becoming kind of ephemeral, where there's no real reason to have a bunch of boxes to take up a bunch of space and to put in $50,000 air conditioning systems into these, $10,000 a month spaces in New York.
I think really with the remote workflow, for sure you can do that. But just switching into like cloud computing, I think also has its own challenges. Like you have to switch like your workflow, your pipeline. And we've run into this. We've been trying now we've got a few machines that are running and we're like getting up to speed with like cloud computing and working on cloud machines with like AWS, but it's been a long road. And you also now have to invest in like more engineering and pipeline to maintain that. I think. Do
you feel like there's a cost savings happening, or?
I mean, right now it's not a cost savings for us. It's netting out because it is still, everybody's still new in this. You're not going to know if it's like really saving a ton of money unless like people manage to get like a sustainable working workflow, that it costs less than the machines that you already have and own, which are, if you already own those machines that you're working with, they're free right now, like essentially. But yeah, I think it definitely is something to look forward to the future, because I think, you're going to get to the point where it just is, you can spin up so many machines that have so much more compute power than what you would have at your office or whatever. And you save money not having to pay rent in New York City. But
so far right now,
I don't know. Like my whole thing is there's always intended and unintended consequences. And for switching to complete compute, I know and I see what the positive consequences are, but I don't have enough information right now to be able to tell you if that is going to be completely like 100 times cheaper, like 10 times cheaper, or is it just going to be like 50% cheaper than being able to, use the machines that you have. I think in the beginning right now, we're trying to do like a hybrid thing where like, if we need excess compute power, or excess machines, we can jump to the cloud, but we're not going full that way because we already have an established pipeline. And we haven't really tested it with like a full show or, trying to do like heavy CG rendering all remote, like through the cloud. Like we haven't done that. I don't know, Leslie, I don't know if you guys have done that or anything, but like we haven't moved there, not yet, but
I wish they would, but I think they haven't yet because of everything that you said, how much infrastructure it takes to do that. I would have liked it only just because of scalability and so that my renders would have gotten out faster, but I don't have a educated comment to make about money regarding it.
So let's end it there. I think Bilali just made an amazing point. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining me and us. Talk about diversity and I guess just like the industry as a whole, just supervising and a lot of kind of the staffing problems and everything that we have going on.
Yeah, cool. Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah,
no,
for sure.
No, you guys are awesome.